First responders in Clark County, Washington, including law enforcement, EMS, and fire departments, are collaborating with school districts and ESD 112 on a program called Handle with Care. This program provides a heads up so children and youth who are exposed to trauma receive appropriate interventions so they can succeed in school to the best of their abilities. This video will explain the rationale behind Handle with Care, how it works, and how you might be involved. But first, let's talk about why our community is concerned about childhood trauma and how trauma can impact students. Our understanding of the impact of adversity and trauma in a child's life has grown as a result of a clinical study conducted in the mid-1990s by Dr. Folletti of Kaiser Permanente and Dr. Anda from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Their research, often referred to as the ACE study, asked more than 17,000 participants if they'd ever experienced any of 10 different types of adversity or trauma before they reached the age of 18. These different types of trauma included physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or one of the 5 different forms of family dysfunction listed here. Although the original study did not ask about poverty, homelessness, racism, bullying, or living through natural disasters or war, we know that these experiences are also highly traumatic for children and adults. The number of these 10 experiences that a child endures before the age of 18 is considered the person's ACE score, the term ACE standing for Adverse Childhood Experience. As an individual's ACE score increases, so does the risk of long-term consequences that can be mitigated by both inborn and developed resilience, best supported through caring relationships with nurturing adults. In the original study, about 2/3 of adults had at least one ACE, and 1/3 had 3 or more. Among Washington's school-age children, a later study found that 12% of elementary students and 42% of high school students have 3 or more ACEs. In an average Washington State high school classroom, 7 students will have 4 or 5, and 3 students will have 6 or more ACEs. The ACE study linked childhood adversity with poor mental and physical health outcomes later in life. This diagram, called the ACE paradigm, helps us to visualize how genetics, childhood adversity, and social conditions can impact a child's neurological development. This takes its toll on social, emotional, and cognitive functioning. Mistaken coping mechanisms like smoking, drinking, or using drugs can later turn into health risks, and combined with higher than normal levels of stress hormones, people with high ACE scores experience more inflammation, disease, decreased community, and increased disability. Ultimately, research tells us that people with an ACE score of 6 who do not receive supported help are greater risk of shorter life expectancy. Why does childhood adversity have such a toxic effect on us? Well, the answer has to do with the body's natural protective response to danger. This response is automatic and comes from the lowest and least developed regions of our brain. In the face of danger, this part of our brain orchestrates the release of more than 30 different stress chemicals, including adrenaline and cortisol. In response, our heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, breathing speeds up, and circulation moves out to our extremities, all so we can run or fight. This is protective and very helpful when there is a real threat. But unfortunately for children who live with adversity and toxic ongoing stress, this system becomes their default, and they increasingly live with high levels of circulating stress hormones, and their bodies and minds are always ready, vigilant, and prepared to defend and protect in one way or another. When our protective brain takes over, our thinking brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, is overridden. Our ability to think rationally, to learn, analyze, create, and communicate clearly and sequentially shuts down. When a child's protective brain works overtime due to trauma or toxic stress, their thinking, learning, and social skills become impaired. Self-regulation becomes extremely difficult. The ability to access knowledge for a test is challenging, and communication and organizational skills are significantly diminished. Even when safe, these children see potential danger around every corner, and their brains and bodies respond accordingly. When any student comes to school, we hope that their brain power is focused on thinking, learning, and relationship formation. But when a child experiences traumatic development, the picture is inverted. Survival becomes their primary concern, and the simple act of sitting still and focusing in class when their stress response and every muscle is yelling run, fight, hide, requires an inordinate amount of energy just for self-regulation. For students who live with trauma, behavior is often not a choice. It is a normal and automatic response, an adaptation to abnormal exposure to stress and adversity. Rather than coming to school fully regulated and ready to learn, these children are often dysregulated. If their survival instinct is to fight back, they may be impulsive, aggressive, argumentative, and anxious. They may resist directives, take risks, and have trouble following rules. They may have a hard time sitting still or be hypervocal. On the other hand, if a child feels helpless, hopeless, or feels they have no control in their situation, they may tend toward running or hiding or dissociating in the face of stress. In this case, they are more likely to be hypo-aroused, tardy, absent, defiant, and forgetful. They may withdraw, be depressed, or cry. When asked questions, they may answer, "I don't know," or "I don't care." As adults who care about children, we need to be aware that both hyperarousal and hypoarousal can indicate a deeper trauma issue. When something like a sound, unpredictability, a circumstance, or a tone of voice triggers a student's memory of adversity, it can impact that student's ability to focus and pay attention. Without consciously realizing it, the student's brain initiates a survival response, making calm behavior, learning, attention, trust, rational thinking, and communication much more challenging, if not impossible. Because trauma is so pervasive, today's schools are working to become trauma-informed. This means that schools recognize how widespread this problem is, and they strive to create safe, nurturing environments that avoid retriggering past trauma or causing additional stress. Unfortunately, we cannot always tell when a child has experienced trauma, but just imagine if we could. Imagine if schools knew when kids were experiencing traumatic stress so they could offer extra support and care. What a difference that could make in the life of a child or youth. Handle with Care is a program that was developed by caring adults because they recognize that when a child is present during a law enforcement, medical, or crisis emergency response, it is often a deeply traumatic experience for the child. Here is how the program works. If a first responder involved in a crisis or emergency response notices that a child or youth is present, the responder notes the child's name, age, school, and grade level. Depending on the agency's protocol, either the responder or his or her supervisor emails as much of this information as possible to ESD 112 before the next school day. ESD 112 will identify or confirm the school and will dispatch a Handle with Care notice to the school district Handle with Care email box. Designated school personnel check for these notices throughout the day. When a notice is received, the school district initiates their Handle with Care response protocol. If a high school student attends Running Start, the district has the option of forwarding the notice to the Handle with Care email box for Clark College Cares team for follow-up at that campus. When a school district receives a Handle with Care notice, they respond, first by making sure the student arrives at school or determining if assistance is needed. Then they provide for the student's basic needs. This might include a change of clean clothing, access to hygiene products, and a private place for washing up, food if the student arrives to school hungry, and a place for the student to rest, sleep, or self-regulate, especially if the student was awake during the night. Test taking and homework deadlines are suspended for the day without penalty because of the impact that trauma has on the brain's ability to focus and perform. The student's behavior is observed by the school counselor or principal, and nurturing support is provided as needed. If appropriate, the student may be referred for further assessment to a school counselor or nurse, who may determine that additional mental health services could benefit the student and his or her family. There are two critically important rules about the Handle with Care program, and these are non-negotiable. First, total confidentiality regarding Handle with Care notices is critically important to the privacy of the student and his or her family. Handle with Care information is only shared on a need-to-know basis beyond the school principal or school counselor. This may include the child's teacher if testing, performances, homework, or behavior are impacted. Students must never be questioned about the circumstances that give rise to the Handle with Care notice. This cannot be overstated. Questioning a child could impair trust, could add to the child's trauma, and could impede or invalidate any ongoing investigation if that is applicable.
Handle with Care is important to me because having been on patrol and seen children in homes where law enforcement activity occurs, I hadn't thought of what the next school day was going to be like for those children. So having the ability to communicate when police activity has occurred in a home to the teachers and counselors of the school to allow that kid maybe not to take an important test that day, or to understand why that kid might be falling asleep or a little bit drowsy or a little bit off kilter that day is beneficial for all, because until our kids feel safe and secure and supported, they're not going to reach their full potential in education anyways.
There are many benefits to the Handle with Care program, and that is why it's been launched by so many cities, counties, and states across the United States. The Harvard Center for the Developing Child tells us that it takes just one supportive relationship with a caring adult to offset the negative impact of childhood trauma. Any one of us could provide that support for a child in our community. As Helen Keller said, the world is full of suffering, but it is also full of overcoming. Let's work together to support every child who experiences adversity so they can build on their strengths, overcome their challenges, rise, and thrive.